Hi guys, Forgotten Wolf here, and this is the Season 1 finale for Game of Thrones Houses, this series, and this time it is on House Stark. Winter is coming. So please like, share, and subscribe, and let's begin. Get a snack if you want to. House Stark was founded by Brandon the Builder during the Age of Heroes. Brandon the Builder was the one who built the wall in Winterfell, the seat of House Stark, and this was among other projects he was linked to like Storm's End and the High Tower. Bran the Builder then became king of the North, and while we don't know who became king after Bran the Builder, we do know that eventually the Night King became the 13th Lord Commander, as he is rumored to actually be a Stark, and he eventually became the Night King, where King Brandon the Breaker now, Stark, would defeat the Night King, and making sure he wouldn't arise for a very long time. After King Brandon the Breaker, the Stark Kings would defeat the Boltons, who were known as the Red Kings, and eventually make the Boltons their bannermen. Then we get along to King Rickard Stark, who made the Reeds their bannermen thanks to a marriage of his daughter to a Reed. A while later we get to King Roderick Stark, who fought off an Ironborn invasion of the North. And the Stark Kings after this would make the Karstarks Lord of Karhold and the Manderleys Lord of White Harbor. This eventually leads to Aegon's conquest, where King Tarn Stark would ride south to meet King Aegon and his sister wives and their dragons and would attempt to defeat them. However, Tarn Stark was given a choice: bend the knee or keep his crown and die. All of his bannermen wanted to fight the Targaryens, but Tarn Stark chose to bend the knee and also to save his people, becoming known as the King who bent the knee. If that's even his correct name, sorry. This would foster a great relationship between the Starks and Targaryens, and eventually Lord Alaric Stark bought Queen Alysanne Targaryen to visit the wall where her dragon would not cross. And the Targaryens were impressed and gave the Night's Watch some land south of the wall. The Starks agreed to this, and the Targaryens became quite popular in the north. And when Lord Rickard Stark was asked to bend the knee to reign near a Targaryen as King Viserys' heir, he did. As Starks don't forget their oaths, and when during the Dance of Dragons, when that broke out between Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen and King Aegon II, Lord Cregan Stark would agree to support the Targaryens and sent one of his armies, the Winter Wolves, south of the wall to support the Blacks. Eventually, Rhaenyra Targaryen was defeated, and Lord Cregan bent the knee to King Aegon II, and eventually King Aegon III. However, Cregan Stark would eventually die, and his son, Lord Rickard Stark, would take his place. I mean, not Rickard. Lord Rickon would once again fight for the Targaryens during the Dornish conquest, where Lord Rickon would die. And after Lord Rickon, there was a Targaryen succession crisis which would be resolved when Baron Stark became Lord of Winterfell. And after this, the Starks would rule peacefully in the north while also helping in the various wars the Targaryens found themselves in. But this would all change in Robert's Rebellion. Lord Rickard Stark was now Lord of Winterfell, and he wanted to enter the Game of Thrones down south, so he promised his heir, Brandon Stark, to Catelyn Tully of Riverrun, would send his second son, Ned Stark, to foster with Jon Arryn of the Vale, and promised his daughter, Lyanna Stark, to Robert Baratheon, also serving as ward to Jon Arryn and Ned's childhood friend and future Lord of Storm's End. Now this and others would sour the Targaryen Stark relationship, but it especially went bad when King Aerys Targaryen and Rhaegar Targaryen made disastrous moves, as during the tourney of Harrenhal, Prince Rhaegar would ride past his wife to name Lyanna Stark Queen of Love and Beauty, which made the Starks and many people mad. And then, while Lyanna was traveling with Brandon's wedding party to Riverrun, Lyanna would go missing, and it became quickly known that it was Prince Rhaegar who kidnapped Lyanna Stark, and the two went missing, and it was said that Rhaegar Targaryen was RPING, Lyanna Stark, if you know what that word is. And if you don't, he was doing bad things to her. This was too much for Brandon Stark, who left Riverrun before he was to be married, to go to King's Landing to make that Rhaegar Targaryen would die. and he was obviously locked up for these statements, and the Mad King summoned Lord Rickard Stark to answer for Brandon's crimes. Rickard demanded a trial by combat, and Ares allowed his request by burning him alive while having Brandon strangle himself to death. This meant that Ned Stark was now Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, but Ares demanded the heads of Robert and Ned. Jon Arryn refuses, and it sparked Robert's Rebellion, where the Targaryens were overthrown. But during the war, Ned Stark would marry Catelyn Tullyming, or Catelyn Stark, and when Robert sent Ned to capture King's Landing, he found that the Lannisters had sacked the city, and according to many people like Ned Stark, Jorah Mormont, it was horrifying, but also discovered that Jaime Lannister, a member of the Kingsguard, had killed the Mad King. Ned called him the Kingslayer, a name that would live in infamy, but it meant that Robert Baratheon was now king. Ned begged Robert to punish Jaime and the Lannisters, but Robert did nothing, and instead sent Ned to go lift the siege of Storm's End and retrieve Lyanna of Stark from the Tower of Joy. When Ned got to the Tower of Joy, he found Lyanna dying with a child, Aegon Targaryen. As it turns out, Lyanna and Rhaegar secretly ran off and married in secret, and they had a child. Ned obviously wanted to cover this up, and Lyanna asked Ned to protect him. Ned did by saying this boy was a bastard, and he named him Jon Snow after Jon Arryn. What the hell? Okay, we're having some technical difficulties here. My internet just completely went out, and we are back. Yeah. When Ned got there, Lyanna had Jon Snow, and Ned covered this up by saying Jon was his bastard, and when he returned to Riverrun, he brought Catelyn Stark back north, and Catelyn presented him Robb Stark, his heir. But Catelyn would hate Jon Snow throughout Jon's time at Winterfell. And following Robert's rebellion, Benjen Stark would join the Night's Watch, and Ned and Catelyn would have 4 more children: Sansa Stark, Arya Stark, Bran Stark, and Rickon Stark. This brings us to the events of Game of Thrones, fucking finally, where Jon Arryn would die, and King Robert Baratheon would name Ned Stark Hand of the King, while also promising Prince Joffrey Baratheon, who was the heir to the Iron Throne, to Sansa Stark. All of the Stark children would find direwolves before this, but Ned accepted Robert's proposal and brought both his daughters, Sansa and Arya, south with him. While in Winterfell, someone pushed Bran out of his tower, breaking his legs, and then sent an assassin to kill him. If it hadn't been for Catelyn Stark and Bran's direwolf summer, Bran would have died. But also, Jon Snow joined the Night's Watch, kind of giving up all claim to the Iron Throne, in a way at least. Meanwhile, during the road south, Arya's direwolf Nymeria would bite Prince Joffrey, and Arya would get Nymeria to escape, and this caused Queen Cersei Lannister to command Ned to kill Sansa's direwolf lady, which he sadly did, despite the Stark girls' objections. Finally, Ned reached King's Landing, where eventually discovered that Robert's kids weren't his, and instead Cersei and Jaime's. Ned would try to get Cersei to leave King's Landing with her children, and said Cersei got King Robert killed in a boar hunting accident and made Joffrey king. Ned would try to use the City Watch to arrest Cersei, Joffrey, Marcella, and Tommen, but Littlefinger betrayed him, and Ned was arrested. However, prior to Ned's arrest, Catelyn Stark would take Tyrion Lannister prisoner and hostage as justice for allegedly trying to have Bran killed and poisoning Jon Arryn. However, as it turns out, Bran saw Cersei and Jaime while it was Littlefinger who sent the assassin to kill Bran. And eventually, Catelyn Stark would lose Tyrion Lannister when Tyrion's trial by combat was won, thanks to Bronn. And with Ned's arrest, Robb Stark would march south to free his fathers and sisters from the Lannisters. And to get south, Catelyn Stark and Robb Stark would agree to marry Robb Stark to one of Walder Frey's daughters. But by this point, Catelyn had lost Tyrion, as I said, and in the first year of the War of the Five Kings, Robb Stark would lift the siege of River Run, taking Jaime Lannister hostage just before Ned Stark was to stand trial. But Jaime being hostage didn't change King Joffrey's mind to execute Ned Stark, despite Cersei and Tywin Lannister wanting Ned to join the Night's Watch to potentially exchange him for Jaime. And King Joffrey's mind is completely an idiot. Yeah, his mind is screwed up. But another Night's Watch member, Yarn, would spot Arya Stark Ned's execution, and he got hold of Arya and got her out of King's Landing. And with Ned's death, the Northern Lords crowned Robb Stark king in the North. And the next year, Robb would take a huge victory at Oxcross and would be threatening Castle Rock itself, the seat of House Lannister. For most of of season 2, Arya Stark would be stuck at Harrenhal, and Robb Stark would try to get allies early in the year before Oxcross by sending Theon Greyjoy to go negotiate with Balon Greyjoy to try to take Castle Rock. Balon declared himself king and said no to Robb's alliance, instead choosing to invade the north, and Theon turned turncloak and he decided to take Winterfell from the Starks. The Starks lost their ancestral seat, which was a huge blow to Robb. This also meant that Bran and Rickon Stark were taken captive. This left Robb deeply shocked, especially since Theon eventually announced to the whole world he had killed Bran and Rickon, leaving Robb without heirs, since Catelyn, Robb, and all the northern men in Robb's camp thought that both of Robb's sisters were captive in King's Landing. And moving on to King's Landing, after the Battle of Blackwater Bay, Joffrey would put Sansa Stark aside to marry Margaery Tyrell to get the Tyrell support in the War of the Five Kings. And Bran and Rickon's deaths would be very troubling for Robb and Catelyn, who both made major fuck-ups. Robb would break his marriage pact with Walder Frey by marrying Talisa, losing the Frey's support, while Catelyn would release Jaime Lannister in order to get her daughters back. But as it turns out, Bran and Rickon weren't dead, and instead they had escaped Winterfell and then hid in the Winterfell crypts, where when they came out of the crypt, they found Winterfell burnt by the Ironborn, and Theon Greyjoy had been taken captive by the Boltons. Bran and Rickon decided to go to the Wall to have the protection of Jon Snow at the Night's Watch. And the next year was the final year of the War of the Five Kings, as Robb Stark would take Harrenhal, while Sansa Stark would be married to Tyrion Lannister, although crucially, Tyrion did not consummate his marriage to Sansa, while Arya Stark would be taken by the Hound, Sandor Clegane, and the Hound had the goal of selling her back to Robb Stark and her family. Bran and Rickon, meanwhile, would eventually split ways as they discovered that through Bran warging into Summer that Jon was with the wildlings, although he did end up escaping. The crucial part is that Bran wanted to become the Three-Eyed Raven thanks to Jojen and Mira Reed, and he would be going on the Wall, but Osha, who was with Rickon, refused to go back north of the Wall. So Bran went beyond the Wall to become Three-Eyed Raven, while Rickon Stark would go to House Umber, thinking House Umber would support the Starks and take him not hostage, but as their ward undercover. Finally for Robb, the Freys had agreed to join his cause again, so long as Edmure Tully would be married to Rosalind Frey. Robb's wife Talisa also became pregnant just before the wedding, and it was hinted that it was a boy. However, when they got to the twins, Arya Stark and the Hound were approaching as well, when the wedding of Rosalind Frey to Edmure Tully happened, and then they were getting bedded. As they were getting bedded, the gates of the castle were shut, and inside the massacre started. All the Northmen were killed except for the Boltons, but Robb, Talisa, and Catelyn all died. All the Starks of the twins died except one. Arya Stark, as she and the Hound witnessed the whole thing, and the Hound got her away and battled his way out of the wedding in order to sell Arya Stark to her aunt, Lysa Arryn. And the Red Wedding happened because Roose Bolton was promised the title of Warden of the North and Lord of Winterfell, while Walder Frey would become Lord Paramount of the Riverlands. And they moved on to Season 4 with presumably all the Starks besides Sansa dead and the war over. And in the first episodes of Season 4, Joffrey was finally married to Margaery Tyrell, but at his own wedding feast, Joffrey would choke on poison and he died. Sansa Stark was escorted out of King's Landing by Varys Blunt, and on orders from Littlefinger, who wanted to take her with him to the Vale. Sansa and Tyrion would be accused of killing Joffrey, but in reality it was Littlefinger who wanted a way to get Sansa out of King's Landing for his own selfishness, and Olenna Tyrell who wanted Margaery to marry Tommen so that she could easily control him. And yeah, a huge era of Westeros had ended with the death of Joffrey and all the Starks going missing, and the Starks had lost everything. At this point, you would think there was nowhere to go but up. And that is the history of House Stark from seasons 1 to 4A. Eventually, I will finish the history of House Stark, but that's not going to be for a long time. But thank you guys so much for watching Game of Thrones House of Season 1. I really wanted to make this series, and you guys have supported so much. I cannot thank you guys enough. This has been absolutely amazing. It's so much fun to make. But now, the series isn't over. Even though the season is over, I'm very excited to announce that starting next year, in January, there will be a Season 2 to Game of Thrones Houses. Next season will focus on the Tyrells, the Tullys, the Night's Watch, the Wildlings, the Freys, and the Boltons. But until then, until next time, bye!